Hello and welcome to this India Today and Business Today special coming to you from the World Economic Forum in icy cold Davos in Switzerland. And it couldn't be coming at a more appropriate time because the world is facing arguably its most complex geopolitical and geo-economic challenges since the Second World War. Over the next few days, my colleague Siddharth Zarabi, the group editor of Business Today, and I, Rajdeep Sardesai, will take you through all that's happening as world leaders converge here in Davos, including the man of the moment, the US President Donald Trump. We'll have thought leaders and newsmakers join us here on India Today, Business Today at this Davos brainstorm. And who better to kick off this special coverage than Børge Brende, the president of the World Economic Forum, the former foreign minister of Norway. Thank you very much, Mr. Brende, for joining us here at the World Economic Forum. You couldn't have chosen, one would argue, a more appropriate time to bring world leaders together, and you've called it the spirit of dialogue. But out there in the real world, we're seeing very little dialogue and more confrontation. In fact, even as we speak, a potential confrontation now politically and economically between Europe and the United States over Greenland. How are you seeing dialogue in this conflicting world?
You know, dialogue is a prerequisite for making any kind of progress. And you're right. Currently, the dialogue going on is really challenged, that's for sure. And as you said, we are faced with the most complicated geopolitical backdrop since 1945. But still, in Davos here, we have 65 heads of states and governments, 1,000 of the leading CEOs of the world. So hopefully, by having him here, inside and not outside, because it's pretty cold. That outside is reflecting the geopolitical situation. I think we might make progress on a few issues.
You know, you're repeating what you've also said earlier, and what I introduced, that this is the most complex geopolitical environment since 1945. I mentioned specifically the possibility now of an escalating trade and political war between Europe and the United States over Greenland. President Trump seems to suggest that he is determined to go ahead and get Greenland either by buying it or through coercion. How are you seeing all of that playing out? I come back to it. How do you see dialogue when there is so much of confrontation and unilateralism?
So we have seen that some impasses have also been able to be dealt with. So they have been kind of breaking impasses. Look at the situation between the US and China. A little bit less than a year ago, there were tariffs of 150%. They came together, and now Mr. Trump is going on a state visit to China in April. And there are in concrete dialogues, because they found out, both of them, that this decoupling wasn't a good idea because it wasn't possible, because they're so intertwined, these economies. US depend on Chinese rare earth and what they're manufacturing. And then China also depends on some of the most advanced microchips and semiconductors from the US. So it will be very interesting when it comes to Europe and the US this week. All the European leaders are basically here. Trump is coming with almost his full cabinet. Maybe they also break some impasses this week. Who knows?
Do you see a solution to this impasse
between Europe and the United States? Because Europe is threatening now to use its potential coercive instruments, including the bazooka, and having countervailing tariffs on the United States if the US puts tariffs on Europe. And Greenland is stuck in the middle. It's a country you know well in terms of the fact that because Denmark, a neighbor of Norway, governs Greenland. Is there a solution you see through dialogue at all? Or are we entering a world where might is right and coercion will take over? The United States says might is right, we're going to take it over.
You know, when a situation is escalating, it's harder to see how you're going to maneuver out of it. And now there is definitely hard words out there. But, the U.S. and Europe also really, are very dependent on each other. It's large trading partners. It's cultural connections for centuries. So let's see now when Mr. Trump arrives on Wednesday. We will have also the key European leaders here. We also will have Zelensky here, so we know there is going to be discussions on Ukraine. It's going to be discussions also on the second phase of Gaza. But it's hard to predict, but maybe the mountain air here, the clear, crisp mountain air will clear everyone's head.
Let me turn the focus to India, but continuing from what you've been telling us. The European Union and India are at very advanced stages of a trade deal. And the fact that we've been working on it with the European Union for quite some time, and we might see a culmination of that process. How significant would you think this would be, given that the overall trade framework globally is completely disrupted?
So we have seen the European Union also taking a very proactive approach here. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the Commission, was just in Latin America, still in Sao Paulo yesterday, signing this Mercosur deal with many of the big Latin American countries having a trade deal with Europe. That was not foreseen because there are many difficult issues related to also agriculture. Now I think it's time for India and the EU. There have been also traditionally many challenges there, but I think both of EU and India, and EU is the largest market in the world, still see that there are benefits, and also sending a strong signal if that deal is going to be made. I would say, though, to the trade outlook, we still expect 3% growth in trade this year. So it's not contracting, it's just growing slower than in the past. Trade is like water, it finds its way.
You've been to India in the recent past. We already have a pretty unique agreement with the EFTA nations. From your point of view, where do you think India's global trade re-engagement stands today? Do you think it's the right thing in this kind of global trade order? And this is after a time when we walked away from some trade deals around 5-10 years ago.
So it is incredible how much economic reforms that have happened in India just the last months that I was expecting, but I thought it was going to happen in the coming decade. I think the situation between the US and India has accelerated some of the political initiatives from the government. I think also, though, down the line, down the road, there will be an agreement between the US and India. But I think India's perspective now is maybe more one of big self-confidence. It's the fastest growing of the large economies in the world, contributing to 20% of the overall global growth. It's incredible. I think in that situation, India can make deals on trade that's in India's interest. I think that is the thing. India will do it when it is in the interest of the long-term development of India.
We'll come to India back again, but I want to come back to the elephant in the room. You mentioned that Donald Trump will be here on Wednesday. There'll be European leaders. There'll be leaders from across the world. There's Zelensky there. The fear that many have is that the World Trade Order has been upended, and increasingly the old alignments are also under stress. NATO, for example. What happens tomorrow if Donald Trump goes ahead and takes Greenland? Where does that leave NATO? Where does that leave these old alliances? When you said that this is the most difficult or complex period since 1945, is that in a way that the old order is completely getting disrupted? And where does that leave organizations like NATO?
I don't think the old order is totally disrupted. We just discussed trade, for example. Still 75% of the global trade happens under the World Trade Organization, WTO's rules and regulations. But new deals are maybe not multilateral. I think on NATO and the relationship between Europe and the US, this is particularly delicate this week. I think that this alliance will continue. I think they will find a way, but it's hard to see what the path is just now. But I think we need to see like that the tension goes down, and then sometimes the negotiation tactic is also to go very far out there, and then there will be something in the middle later on. But, now this is having a lot of the focus. Last week it was Venezuela, the week before it was Iran, and then it was Gaza, then it was Ukraine, and then it was also East Asia Sea. So we just have to deal with all these complexities at the same time, and hopefully we will see no real escalation into a big war, because that is not likely, but that is the most dramatic scenario that will also kill growth, because growth is back now in the global economy. More than 3% is not bad,
No, it is, but the world,
from a distance, at least from an Indian perspective, seems to be in perpetual conflict. And therefore, as I said, it seems that the world order is upended. Even as we are at the World Economic Forum, on my way, I got a flash that the Iranian foreign minister is supposed to come to address the World Economic Forum. US senators are saying, why is the Iranian foreign minister being invited to the World Economic Forum? So tensions seem to be rising. And at the same time, India has been invited to be part of a board of peace on Gaza. So on Gaza, we are seeing a ray of hope. On Iran, the world seems to be in conflict. It seems a very, very complicated place and time to be in. Do you really see the potential for a dialogue? Do you see this uncertainty settling down? Or as long as Donald Trump is in the White House or at WEF, we don't know what tomorrow will bring.
So I'm much more of a glass half full than half empty guy. When we met last year in Davos, we were very concerned that the geopolitical confrontations would kill global growth. And now we're back in Davos, and the global growth is higher than we expected. We also see that the new technologies, artificial intelligence or frontier technologies, are driving growth and investments that we haven't seen in decades. So trade is growing slower.
but it's going slowly.
Piece is growing slower, but we do think that the frontier technologies can replace trade as a global growth engine. So who would have thought that we were sitting here in Davos a year later, we have higher trade growth, we have huge investments in the new technologies, and the overall growth perspective is not bad. So it seems like even this catches a lot of headlines in media, that countries also find a way to adapt. I think this is also on the trade piece. They have adapted to a new reality. That's why they do bilateral trade agreements, mega trade agreements, and we will see also in global cooperation that now the Security Council in the UN is not the place where the most important negotiations are happening. They're more bilateral and different, and of course you do see interest spheres established, and this is contrary to what we predicted with multipolar world. Multipolar world would mean a lot of countries. Now it seems like there are some big movers and shakers that are in control.
So how do we describe it? If it's
Not multipolar. How do we describe a world where there's global cooperation, also bilateral cooperation taking place, and conflicts also? It almost seems as if conflict and cooperation coexist at the moment across the world.
Exactly. I think we are seeing like cooperation in a very competitive world.
cooperation,
Cooperation in a very competitive world. Interesting.
Yeah, but that would also raise the question that what happens to smaller economies?
where might is right cannot be their operating principle. Do you think smaller economies,
Smaller nations are at a risk in this kind of trade order and bilateral one-on-one engagements that are evolving?
Yes, I do.
So, but they will also form coalition of willings. So you mentioned EFTA earlier, where there was a trade deal between EFTA and India. EFTA is like the only international organization where Switzerland and Norway are superpowers. It's Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. But they're like 12th largest economy in the world. They came together and they're forming trade relations under
Very fast.
under the radar screen.
Yeah.
And I think the smaller nations will come together. For India, though, is now a big economy. You know, I think it's going to be a $10 trillion economy pretty soon. So India will have now to balance also in this very fragmented, competitive world.
How should India balance
China.
Is I think India better to answer than for me. I think India so far has dealt with a very delicate situation wisely, not rushing it. But as I said, I do think there will be an agreement between India and the US down the road because I think also US want a good relationship with India, and US also wants checks and balances in Asia, and I probably don't find anyone else than India that has the size to represent a balance. I guess that is the thinking in DC, but then there are some short-term obstacles there that have to be mitigated. No, I'm being a diplomat again.
Yeah, you're being very diplomatic, so I'm going to push you on that. If I were to ask you, Mr. Brende, the top 3 risks, and some of them are part of the discussions that you're having at the World Economic Forum, what would those top 3 risks be to ensuring a more stable world order at the moment, which allows growth, which allows trade across the world, smaller and larger economies? What would be the top 3 risks that the world is facing at the moment? If we were to say 1, 2, 3.
I think I already touched on the biggest risk that is not very likely, but with huge potential impact. It's like if the Iranian situation had escalated and got out of control, it could have affected the whole Gulf region that is also extremely important for oil and gas. So war is escalating, and with the big powers on different sides, that is the biggest risk, but hopefully not happening. Right. I would say second, probably bubbles in the economy.
AI bubble?
There can be like AI bubble, it can be a crypto bubble, there can also be a debt bubble because we are more indebted than any other time since 1945. So many countries have as their biggest expenditure on their state budget is paying on the interest. I would say though bubbles, AI bubble and crypto bubble is easier to handle because we have had bubbles before. We had the railway bubble, we had the electricity bubble, we had the dot-com bubble, but the technologies are still there. But the debt thing is more affecting the financial system. So that's why we really need a lot of growth moving forward to grow out of it. I would say the third one are like the black swans, like future pandemics. It is like cyber crime, warfare, those things that are the black swans.
You're being very diplomatic in the sense that you're not including the man who you're hosting in a couple of days, Donald Trump. He's going to be in power for another 3 years. We don't know what comes next with Donald Trump. Last week it was Venezuela. You take over a country, effectively remove the leader of that country, take over their oil economy, not speaking about human rights or democracy, but speaking about oil. Do you feel that Donald Trump is one of the global risks that the world runs, this Trumpian world order, where we don't know what tomorrow will bring?
You become very Trump-focused, huh?
Well, I can see all eyes even
in Davos. The very fact that Donald Trump has created such a buzz that he's coming here. I mentioned the fact that you've also got, interestingly, Mr. Børge, you've got the Iranian foreign minister coming here. So you've been careful to balance, in a sense, spheres of influence. Or
U.S. president is a fact.
Yes.
And he will be there in the years to come. But in Davos, you know, we also have a lot of other key players. We have, for the first time, the Syrian president. We have President Sisi from Egypt. We have practically 6 out of 7 G7 leaders. But it's true that Donald Trump also attracts a lot of media attention. I think one has to deal with the U.S. administration case by case. And then I think it's totally possible to have a dialogue. I mentioned India-US. I think is going to be solved. I think they're going to find ways also on the tariffs and Greenland. I think we're going to make progress even on, hopefully on Ukraine and Gaza during this week. So I think we just have to be used to a lot of noise, and then we have to look at it in a systemic way. What can we still do in like a totally different context than we used to operate in?
You're making a very interesting point. You're saying the media should perhaps focus less on the noise that comes out, emanates, let's say, from White House, and look at perhaps the other relationships that are being struck quietly under the radar in some instances that actually make the world, you hope, a better place or a more stable order, that don't focus all your attention on what happens in and out of the White House.
Am I correct?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Interesting.
You know, we've just got a couple of moments to go, a couple of minutes. Overall, as you sit here today from your vantage point in Davos, do you believe the world is in a better place in 2026 January than it was a year ago? Or do you believe 2026 will be a decisive year, given the fact, as we said at the outset, we are facing a very complex geopolitical environment? Is 2026 going to be the critical year in a way for the world?
The economy looks strong and stronger, been very resilient. But if you ask me about the geopolitics, I think we're worse than last year and better than next year.
And is there any
Particular geopolitical issue that troubles you the most in all these conflicts taking place? Where is we haven't resolved Ukraine. We don't know what will happen next with Iran. There are these fears of influence that the world is being divided. Is there any particular conflict that you hope in 2026 will be resolved, or at Davos will see an actual breakthrough? Because Greenland is another new frontier that's been opened.
I think after almost 4 years, I think the Ukraine war possibly could end this year. I'm not saying it will, but I think if there's willingness, one can find a solution. I think the second steps on Gaza hopefully will be implemented, and we can see also that there will be then investments and start to rebuild the Gaza piece. I'm worried about Sudan. I'm worried about also the situation in a lot of developing countries that don't get that kind of attention because you know all the air is sucked out by some more media-friendly topics.
Okay.
Let's leave it there, Børge, Brendan. I think you've given us a sense of a broad overview, and I'm glad that the World Economic Forum is tackling all these issues head-on, whether it's trade, artificial intelligence, or indeed the conflicts that are now dominating the world order, which is why this couldn't be a more important time for the World Economic Forum. And good to have a Norwegian as the head in a way, because you, in a sense, hopefully, will bring the necessary balance to this very friction and faction-ridden world.
Thank you. Thank you for the trust. You know, I'm as Indian as I am European.
Really? What does that mean?
I think the strength of the World Economic Forum, of course I'm biased, but is that we are a truly impartial, independent platform. So we do have the Chinese and the Americans in the same room. We also have the Indians here with a very strong delegation. At the same time, we even have the Pakistani Prime Minister. So it's a unique platform where people meet, not necessarily agreeing, but at least we have the right people in the same room.
Thank you very much for joining us. The world in Trumpian turmoil, and what happens next? To join us now are two very special guests. Privileged to be joined by Gideon Rachman. He's the chief foreign affairs commentator for the venerable Financial Times. Also joined by the global affairs columnist for the Washington Post, Ishan Tharoor. Appreciate both of you joining us. Couldn't have chosen a better moment to talk to both of you. And let's start with the latest conflict that's convulsing the world, which is Greenland. Donald Trump making it clear he wants Greenland by hook or crook in a way. Gideon, your first response. Are we heading now for an inevitable conflict between Europe and America over Greenland? And do you see a pushback, or Donald Trump taking it over much in the manner that he took over Venezuela just a week ago?
Well, I think we're already in the conflict. The question is how it develops from here. I actually don't think the Americans are going to do military action as a first resort, or they may not do it at all, because I think that would be so drastic. I think people around Trump would try to restrain him. But I do think that they are going to ramp up the pressure on Europe in ways that lead to an intensifying kind of confrontation. They will do these tariffs, probably, unless maybe the Supreme Court comes to our rescue and says the tariffs are illegal. Europe will hit back with tariffs. I'm pretty sure about that. And then I think Trump has this tendency to link security and economics. So I think he will then cut off arms sales to Ukraine. Actually, it's the Europeans buy the arms from America and hand them over to Ukraine. Do what he can to put Ukraine in an even worse situation than it is now, which then threatens European security. And then the question is really, can NATO survive all of this? It may survive as a sort of nameplate on a door, but I'm not sure it's really a function
Are you
of...
seeing a European pushback then? Do you believe the Europeans will push back? Donald Trump's written a letter to the Norwegians suggesting that because they didn't give him a Nobel Peace Prize, he has no interest in peace. Are you seeing the Europeans push back, or will they just have to accept that might is right?
No, I think they will push back. I mean, maybe that's me as a European, and of course Britain's no longer a member of the EU, but interestingly is signing all the letters with the Europeans. They've absolutely sided with Europe on this one. And the UK political leaders are united on this, the Conservatives and Labour, saying this is unacceptable from Trump. So oddly, Trump's pushing Britain back towards Europe. So I think there'll be pushback. I wouldn't completely rule out Europe folding. I think they're desperately searching for some sort of compromise, but I don't think Trump is in a compromising mood. And if there's no compromise to be had, Europe will have to push back.
Ishan, Trump is not in a compromising mood. Is he determined, particularly after what happened in Venezuela, to make sure that Greenland comes next? Is there any possibility of Trump pulling back? The Financial Times memorably last year says, Taco, Trump always chickens out. Is he going to chicken out of Greenland, or is he determined to go ahead with it? And what is driving this so-called Donro doctrine, as he puts it?
It's quite fascinating. If you look at the national security strategy that came out from the White House just a few months ago, there's barely a word about Greenland in there. There's no official policy in this administration anchored around security strategy in the Arctic with Greenland. But this is very much the personal conviction of President Trump. President Trump has gotten his head that this is something the U.S. must have. And absolutely, when you talk about the Donro Doctrine, it is this kind of 21st century manifest destiny of the United States that he seems to feel that he's capable of exerting. He believes that, absolutely, as his advisor Stephen Miller said on TV, the iron law of the world is might makes right, and they can do what they want in the Western Hemisphere because they deserve to. And that is, it's a set of impulses less than a strategy at this point. And it also flows out of a kind of culture war within the United States. He still sees himself at war with the left at home, and he extends that to a broader war with a kind of global liberal establishment, the Davos class on a certain level, the custodians of the international order, the UN, and it all flows out of that kind of animus and hostility. So if you're looking for a strategy, that's basically it. But even then, it doesn't fully explain what's happening with Greenland and why it matters so much to Trump.
Why does it matter so much to Trump? It comes if it's not about strategy, if it's about just individual impulse. With Venezuela, when he makes a speech, he doesn't speak about democracy, human rights. He ends up speaking mainly about oil.
I'll let Ishan answer, but just a quick one. I think it's because it's big. It's on the side. It's a big place, even bigger on the Mercator projections on the maps. So it looks like it's the size of Africa. It's about a fifth the size of Africa. And he thinks, wow, I can put my face and the American flag on this, and I'll be really great, and everyone will really admire me for this. I don't think there's anything more than that.
The joke absolutely is that he's seen the Mercator projection as opposed to the actual map. There's an American tradition about wanting Greenland. In the mid-19th century, when Seward bought Alaska, he also wanted to buy Greenland. And then, at that point in time, they saw it as if they have Alaska, if they have Greenland, then by extension, they should logically get Canada. And Trump has also talked about the artificial nature of the U.S.-Canada border. So it's a quite hysterical vision of kind of American expansion in the 21st century. But look, I think the fundamental reality is that we are now in a situation where Trump's personality drives American policy, where there's no legislative check against him because the Congress is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. The Republican Party is wholesale captured by him still, and you've seen very little dissent, even by legislators who we know in private are tearing their hair out over some of Trump's rhetoric and posturing.
So you see him going ahead with it. Yeah, you don't see this as posturing. You don't see Donald Trump using this then to strike some kind of a bargain. You see him going ahead and capturing Greenland in 2026.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think there are a lot of things that would have to happen for that to happen, but I do think he will use it as it would be a fly in the ointment in the American-U.S. relationship. As Gideon said, it could foil foil European hopes for the U.S. to play a sustainable and good role in whatever happens in Ukraine. And we'll see how things evolve. But Trump likes to have these hobby horses that he beats over time.
Yeah, I think one thing that could stop him is you're beginning to see the markets go down quite sharply today. And if you mentioned the whole taco thing, that was really in response to a market crash after the Liberation Day tariffs. Trump changed his mind. And I think if the markets really go down, if the bond market, if Europeans start selling, American debt, that is the kind of thing that might cause him. He won't drop it. He'll just change the subject.
Can I just look at this Donro doctrine for a little bit, for a bit, because Gideon, you wrote a column in the Financial Times suggesting that if this spheres of influence argument goes further, if the Americans decide the Western Hemisphere is ours, it's Venezuela one day, it could be Colombia the next, it could be Cuba the third, it could be Greenland. The Chinese tomorrow could say the South China Sea is ours, Taiwan is ours, and where does it all end? Do you see, therefore, are we inexorably heading towards a US-China battle for spheres of influence? If Donald Trump is allowed to get away now, the Chinese tomorrow could get away with Taiwan, and that could have implications for countries like India as well.
Totally. Taiwan and indeed the South China Sea. I mean, reading Trump's letter that you referred to about how the Danish claim to Greenland is just based on, a few ships. It's very similar to the kind of arguments China makes about the South China Sea. This is all lost in the midst of time. We have as legitimate a claim as everybody else. So Trump is legitimating that form of argument. We're the most powerful people here. We can make up any argument that we like, and we're just going to grab it and see what you can do. And international laws are jokes, so don't even try and stop us. Those are Trump's arguments, and those, actually put rather more subtly, are also China's arguments. And if Trump concentrates on the Western Hemisphere, the Chinese will think, great, we'll take our sphere. And incidentally, their sphere is a much bigger share of the global economy. So it would be a crazy deal for America to accept that.
So could there be a check on Trump? The fact that the fear that someone in the White House or someone in America will say, look, if we go ahead with doing this, the Chinese could well have their sphere of influence. Could that be a check? Or is Trump not worried about the consequences of a Donro doctrine across the world?
I don't think they see it in those frames. I don't think they see China as inexorably taking what it wants. But I think what's interesting about this framing of the Donro doctrine is that it comes from a political movement in the United States that believes in the kind of the supremacy of its power and
Make America great again.
Yes, and they feel entitled to wield their power as they see fit, whatever the rules, whatever the norms, whatever the international considerations. What's interesting about how it's being framed is that it's actually in many ways a shrinking of American power. It's so much of what's constituted American power over the last generation or multiple generations has been its capacity to project strength around the world through soft power, through alliances, through trade, and this seems to be a withdrawal. I mean, Trump is withdrawn from numerous international agencies. He's endangering the transatlantic alliance in profound ways, and so in many ways, the view in Washington amongst this foreign policy establishment is that the Donro doctrine is a retreat.
So could he be willing to risk this transatlantic alliance? Could he be willing to risk NATO, the post-World War II order, possibly even retreat from Ukraine and say, look, this is for Europe and Putin to decide, I'm out of it? Is that possible?
Yeah, their view is that the post-World War II order is failing. And their view is that the post-World War II order is no longer fit for purpose. And that we have to build something else out of its ruins.
I think
You see, he could withdraw out of the transatlantic alliance and say, allow Vladimir Putin to have his own sphere of influence in Europe, including Ukraine?
he's pretty close to that already. I mean, I think we're 50% of the way there. Sure, I think that is where we're heading, I'm afraid.
Where Ukraine would be left towards, the Americans would not want to play a role in Ukraine?
The Americans have cut off aid to Ukraine already. I mean, they don't do financial aid or arms aid of the scale that the US was doing under Biden. What they do is sell weapons to the Europeans, which the Europeans can then hand on to Ukraine, and they provide intelligence, which is really, really important to Ukraine in the battle to stop the Russians. Now, President Macron of France, interestingly, said just recently that France now provides 80% of the intelligence that Ukraine needs. I sincerely hope that is true, because in that case Ukraine can fight on, but if not, they could be in serious trouble, because so much of this is done with satellites and drones.
So
and
what
so on.
happens to the Ukraine war? Does it continue through 2026? What's your sense? Are we heading through a situation where the Ukrainians find themselves increasingly vulnerable and isolated?
Look, I think just to piggyback on what Gideon was talking about, the Trump folks will tell you that this is all a good thing, that Europe should be taking the lead on all this, that we have instigated a change within Europe that was fundamentally necessary. And I think some Europeans would agree that we shouldn't be so dependent on a certain U.S. commitment indefinitely and at scale. When it comes to this year in Ukraine, I think it's a very complicated situation. President Zelensky faces a quagmire at home politically as well. But obviously, the Europeans have rallied around him. They want to give Ukraine the support it needs to have a strong seat at the bargaining table. But it really is, in terms of what happens next, it really is, we're waiting for actual good faith from the Russians, and we've yet to see it.
Can I come back to China for a moment? Because it is the other dragon in the room. If Trump is the elephant, China is the dragon in the room. I mean, are we going to, how do you see this Chinese-US equation playing out in the next 12 months?
I think Trump has handed China a massive opportunity, because despite the fact that Biden is often sort of slagged off as a weak president, actually he'd done something really quite important, which was to construct a kind of global Western alliance which was steadily squeezing China's space, which to my mind actually included India, but also included, you know, the Europeans, the Australians, Japanese.
Groups like the Quad, for example.
And Trump has trashed that and is driving people back towards China. So Canada has just, Mark Carney's just been in Beijing, signed a trade deal with China, and other Europeans will be heading in that direction. Canada's not European, spiritually perhaps. But, you know, I remember this time last year, I had a meeting with a sort of senior British security type, and I said to him, look, the way Trump's behaving, would it be such a bad idea to warm up to China? And he said, yeah, that would be a really terrible idea. And he laid out for me why we should not do that. But I suspect if we had that conversation again, I think it's certainly on the table now.
The other sort of the achievement, or Trump builds as an achievement, is now the setting up of a board of peace for Gaza. He's invited India, for example, to be part of the board of peace. Do you see, therefore, a more stable 2026 in the Middle East? Or that's with Netanyahu in Israel, with the Iranians potentially seen by Trump as another enemy country in the area? How do you see that play out? Do you see any kind of, in this increasingly uncertain, unstable world, could we see some glimmer of hope at all in the Middle East, or no? I mean, what sense does this board of peace really make?
I mean, I think it's far too early to tell, to say anything definitive about what this board of peace will accomplish, let alone what this board of peace actually is. It's a confusing mix of governments and figures, and what Trump wants to do with it, it seems from the reporting and from what we're hearing, is that he wants to wield it in such a way that it jostles with the existing international architecture that exists around peacemaking, the UN system, and so forth. So it's his desire for what it's going to be is quite grand. When it comes to finding a path out in Gaza, there is this Trump 20-point plan. The Trump folks believe that it's in motion now. What we're seeing on the ground is a little bit different. And then, of course, there are a lot of things happening in the region that are very complicated. You're seeing a major rift blow out in the open between the Saudis and the Emiratis. You're going to have elections at some point in Israel that will complicate the equation there as well. And then there's, of course, developments in Iran. So there's a lot happening right now.
Where does all these, where do these disruptions leave countries like India? Countries that would probably benefit from a more stable world order. We found ourselves in the crosshairs of Donald Trump over tariffs, because we were buying Russian oil. What can India do? Do countries like India really have any elbow room, you believe, Gideon, or any role at all to play in this increasingly uncertain world order where even the United Nations appears completely enfeebled?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredibly complicated and difficult situation, but it is one that offers opportunities for India, because Yes, I think, clearly it's been shown over the past year that putting your faith in Donald Trump is not a great idea, because you can have a wonderful meeting with him in May and a disastrous meeting with him in June. Nothing lasts with him. He'll change his mind. And you've got real problems with China, with Pakistan, etc. But you also, obviously, India has enormous strengths. It's a huge country, now the largest population in the world, one of the 5 largest economies in the world. So as everybody is looking to diversify their relationships away from the United States, which essentially is what America's allies have to do, they'll all look to India. Everybody will see India as an essential partner. So, the UK has done a trade deal with India, the EU will want to do it, South Korea, Japan, everybody's going to want to intensify relations with India right across the board, economic, security, etc. And, I don't expect, India's not a country that joins formal alliances, but it will have many opportunities.
Ishan, I interviewed your father, Shashi Tharoor, a few weeks ago, and he said, years ago I said the world would be multi-aligned, not multipolar, but multi-aligned. Do you see that happening? And countries like India will therefore have their alignments in a way with different potential bilateral partners. You'll see more bilateralism and possibly multilateralism as we knew it fading away, because there's very little common ground across the world, but there's lots of common ground between countries, and that's where India's future also lies.
Yeah, I think Gideon's newspaper put it best a few years ago when they summoned this concept of the a la carte world order, where you can pick and choose in different moments the arrangements you want on your plate. And I think that is certainly where we're headed. I think that's sort of the worldview of the Trump people. That's the worldview of many in the global South. And I think the one way to spin this positively is that it's at least honest. It's at least, we don't have to appeal to certain values and rhetoric that are constantly, dispensed with when it's convenient. But it also leads to profound uncertainty. It leads to scenarios where you see rogue governments, bad actors, acting with impunity all the more.
I think we'll miss hypocrisy. At least in the old days, there were like values you could appeal to, and occasionally you could shame people and say, look, this isn't consonant with what you'd say. And it did sometimes affect their behavior.
Ishan, you also wanted to make a point, interestingly, about Indians living in America in this Trumpian age.
Yes, I think it's been really striking over this past year, the first year of his second term, the cultural shift you've seen in the American conversation, especially online and especially among the kind of MAGA Trump base, about Indians. Indians for a long time have patted themselves on the back in the U.S. about being the most successful minority group in the country, the preeminent model minority. But we've seen this rapid acceleration to a different narrative about Indians as invaders, the complete contempt for the H-1B program that's brought in so many Indian tech workers, just unabashed racism about Indians in India in the MAGA discourse. And it's been quite striking. So as we think about India's place in all this, the place of Indian Americans has also been complicated by the past year.
Because you're in this age of these strongmen, who have little place for democracy. That's right, the era of the strongmen across the world. But in this era of the strongmen, can we even predict where we will be 12 months from now if we all meet in Davos again? Will the world be a better place, you believe, a quieter place, or are we going to live in a world of perpetual conflict and noise for a while longer?
I suspect it's going to be the latter. And Gideon and I were with your network a year ago here, and we speculated, is Trump going to be this? This is at a moment of relative optimism about what Trump could be, and we speculated, is he going to be some kind of custodian of a positive shift, or is he going to be more of a mafia boss? And I think he's answered quite definitively on the side of being more of a mafia boss.
Yeah. And the thing about mafia families is you can get periods of peace, but then eventually they start shooting at each other.
We're looking at the US president, arguably the most powerful man in the world at the moment, and calling him a mafia boss.
I have no problems.
We did this a year ago. On this network.
No, I mean, I think that, he's his whole modus operandi is, I don't know, I've never met a real mafia boss, but the ones in the movies, very reminiscent.
Let's leave it there, Gideon and Ishan. I think we've got plenty of food for thought, and we'll wait and see where the mafia boss and his mafiosi take the world a year from now. We can only hope that we will at least see a few rays of light in what seems at the moment to be a rather difficult world. Ironically, the World Economic Forum has branded this year the spirit of dialogue. I don't know where the dialogue's coming in this world of seemingly perpetual conflict. You would have suggested possibly a better a title than the spirit of dialogue.
Well, I mean, I think Ishan was saying before we came on, it's kind of a vain hope rather than a reality. But I mean, I suppose all one could say is people are still talking because Trump will be here, the Secretary General of NATO will be here, Macron, etc. So they'll talk to each other. I'm not sure there'll be a positive outcome then.
More often than not, world leaders at the moment seem to talk at each other rather than talk to each other. Ishan Tharoor, Gideon Rachman, great pleasure having you here at the Davos. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO, US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Thank you very much for joining us here in Davos. Let's cut the chase and ask the straight question. We've had you a couple of times in the last few months, each time talking about the US-India trade deal. Will it happen? Won't it happen? We are now in 2026. Are we any closer to sealing a deal than we were, let's say, a few months ago?
The question I have to ask is, does a trade deal matter? And when you look at...
That's an interesting way of changing the goalpost. After first saying, we want a trade deal, you're saying now, does a trade deal matter? But go ahead.
The Indian side and the US side have been negotiating many, many times. And I would say that it got concluded, went to the president, and he kind of changed the goalpost. And where we are now at the moment is almost final again. It will go to the president, he'll take a call. I believe we will have some kind of a trade deal in the next 3 months.
That's the 3 months that we are pushing it. So we are looking at, what are we, January in April. And it won't be a full-blown trade deal in your view? It'll be more limited?
It will be a full-blown trade deal because what India is doing is, which the Europeans and others did not do, is we are getting to nuts and bolts, making sure that reciprocal trade terms are agreed upon. What are we going to agree on the agriculture side? So if you look at what has happened with the European trade deal, suddenly Trump said, I'll put 10% more penalty on Greenland. Whereas this one is going to be a signed deal between the two countries.
Before Siddharth steps in, just to ask you, can we then trust a Donald Trump? Given that, as you say, he's weaponized tariffs. He's using tariffs as a weapon. He's used it against India, saying if you buy Russian oil, I put 25% penalty. He's gone ahead, done that. Many of us would believe that that's hypocritical because other countries are trading with Russia, don't get the same penalties imposed on them. Are we dealing with someone who is simply, who one simply can't trust? How does one trust Donald Trump to do a trade deal with him?
Well, that's a question countries are asking. That is, when you come to terms and conditions, will that change? Yeah. And we have seen the case of European, they have an agreement, 15% tariff, and suddenly 10% more tariff, and if until June, they may basically take up another 25%. So the question everybody's asking is a trade deal, will it last?
Because you know, the messaging from the MAGA base of Donald Trump, the Make America Great Again, they seem to suddenly be sort of almost targeting the Indian immigrant for all the remarkable work that Indian immigrants have done in the United States, have built a reputation. Suddenly in the last 1 year, you've had these seemingly intemperate remarks and attacks made on Indian Americans. Again, it comes back to it. How do you shut that out? How do you keep that out now and just focus on your mutual interests?
So the small group have been very active on social media being anti-Indian American. But vast majority of people are welcoming Indian Americans. And what's interesting is, if you notice, is that the 75 countries list where visa restriction was put on, India was not on that. No, that sends a message.
But also the messaging that emerges, and taking forward Rajdeep's points, people from the Trump circle, so the new US ambassador to India started off, I think, absolutely in Indian cricketing parlance, right on the front foot. He's batting on the crease. But they keep saying negative things, including the latest remarks from Peter Navarro on energy. And many of these confuse people that what is going on? Is this like almost like driven by racism, Mukesh, if I may put it that way?
I think it's driven by ignorance. That's number one. It's driven by the success of Indian Americans, because you have a migrating community for the first time in the history of America, which has not gone on the economic low end. It has come straight up to the top. And today, the average American Indian's salary is twice the national per capita income itself. But more,
do people there realize, Mukesh, about the people who are going there and the kind of institutions that they get into and how tough it is to become an IIT in India? They're getting not the best of India, they're getting the best of the world, actually.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we, as working with the media, had to communicate more. I think we're not also communicating that very much itself. But I just want to add one more thing to the data. Indian Americans make 1.5% of the US population. They generate 6% of GDP. And if you look at 3 weeks ago, President Trump tweeted, people who, countries, immigrants who are on the government dole system itself, Indian immigrants were not there any of the list itself.
Okay, those were just some of the conversations that we've had on day one of the World Economic Forum here in Davos. We'll be back tomorrow. The good news is the sun is shining. Let's hope that the darkness and the clouds that loom over the world order in this Trumpian age also blow away. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Jai Hind. Namaskar from Davos.